So, yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
See?
All righty.
Right there.
We're asleep at the switch here. No, I am. She isn't. This is Grow Your Own, the end of July. Let's see, we started in April, May, June. No, when did we start? We did start in April, didn't we? April, May, June, and July is almost done now. So all we have left is August, September, and October. So we're more than halfway. All righty. I extended my presentation today because at first I thought, I really can't talk about rotation for a whole hour, which of course, some people can, but I decided I couldn't. So right off the bat, Rima once again got this. Can they see that about? But you don't have to see this. What I'm going to suggest you do is there are many sites out there, but go for one that ends in .edu, which usually means it's connected to a university.
Right.
And usually they know what they're doing. And Cornell especially because it's a land grant, originally an agricultural school. And so for over 150 years, whatever it's been now, they've been doing research on what they talk about. It's not Aunt Harriet's bright idea. Now, maybe Aunt Harriet's bright idea is scientifically backed up, but we don't know that. All right. So go to a source that should know what they're talking about and ask for, what do I want you to ask for?
Well, I was wondering if they just type in this, rotating vegetables by family.
Okay, that's
I'll bet this document will come right up.
okay.
'Cause that's the
Rotating
title of the
vegetables
document.
by family, or if you want to branch out, vegetable crop rotations and something.edu.
Huh.
And there are many versions of this, all more or less the same. So we're going to put this aside for now. By the way, corn was not listed in here anywhere, which I don't, well, you
Yeah,
find.
it's right there
Oh, it's right there.
under grain,
Oh, because I don't grow grains, I just skipped right over it.
because we talked about corn specifically. So I thought, oh, let's make sure that's in there.
Yes, all righty. Well, I don't grow it anymore because I finally gave up the battle with the raccoons.
Mhm.
They always won. And I wasn't willing to build Fort Knox to keep them out. So
They
no.
did that with our sunflowers.
Oh,
Very sad.
really?
Yeah.
They never bothered my sunflowers.
Oh, yeah.
All righty. So today we're going to sneak in early harvest first, and then we're going to talk about mapping your garden, because very few of us have the type of memory, especially as you get older. You can remember where you planted what the year before or the year before that, because usually they suggest, if you can, a 3-year cycle of rotation. So I do it on paper and pencil.
I can think of another advantage.
What's that?
If you are planting your garden with another person and they insist that you planted something in a certain spot and you really didn't, if you have it all written down, then that's definitive.
We won't go to where that other person is,
No.
but you all know who we mean. I live alone and the cat doesn't argue with me as far as the garden plan goes, so I don't have to worry about that. But I do have tales from the past, but that's another topic, which would go under the title of getting uncooperative people to help you in the garden, whether it's a husband or a grandson or whatever, right? Another topic. All righty. So mapping, which will freak some people who got as far as 6th grade with their math and then decided they didn't like math out. And then finally rotations. And by the way, when was the last time you watered your garden?
This morning.
This morning. Okay. As you all probably know, I haven't heard the word on the radio. All I hear is about recession, but we're in a depression as far as water goes. And remember that 1 inch a week?
Yes.
Not sprinkling for 2, 3, 4 minutes. That doesn't do any good. If you're going to stand there with the hose, stand there for an hour with the hose, so that it sinks down in. You want the roots to go deep. You don't want them to stay all shallow on the top. Okay. Show and tell time. By early to the middle of July, depending on how early you got your crops in, depending on how the early season was, cool, warm, how much rain you got. By early July, you should be able to start. Well, I'm not talking about lettuce and spinach. I'm talking about the longer things like potatoes, carrots, onions. You can start harvesting them. Now, those of you that missed, I think it was last week or the week before, when I talked about if you shallowly plant your potatoes and then mulch them with 6 to 8 inches, about 2 weeks after flowering, which would be first, second week in July, you can wiggle your hand into the mulch and find the biggest potato, because they don't all mature at the same time. If you went out there and have you done this by chance?
No.
Dug up one of your hills of potatoes now, you would find, depending on the variety, anything from this size to marble size, maybe 8 of them. So you don't want to pull up the whole plant because you lose a huge amount of production. Okay. But there's no reason why starting in the middle of July, you can't go down your row. I have 20 hills in a 20-foot row. Find the nice one and pluck it off. And so that way I have 2 rows. So for me, July and August until they really die in early September, I can take 1 potato per hill as it gets big. Now this happens to be, right, it's going to go right out of my head, a Norland, Norland, which is an early 90 days roughly, red potato with thin skins and shallow eyes. Now the reason you like shallow eyes is if you're going to peel your potato, you don't have to dig out deep craters. Some potatoes are not so shallow as this. And then of course, when this is a diversion. This is my grandmother's potato peeler, which means it's probably getting on towards 100 years old. My soapbox lecture in 2 sentences is, they don't make them like they used to. When I was first married a half century ago, I bought a potato peeler. It lasted 10, 15 years, had to get another one. And then another couple of decades went by and had to get another one. So I was on my 3rd potato peeler when my mom died, and I cleaned out the drawers and there was her potato peeler. So for the last 15 years, after, I don't know, 50 years, it's going to last forever. So the moral of the story is they just don't make them like they used to anymore, unfortunately. All right, potatoes. Carrots, if you planted them by seed in the 3rd week of April, usually in 10 weeks, depending on the season. You know, if it's really cold for a long time in May, then things take a little longer. But depending on the variety, by now you should have some good sized carrots. Well, most of my carrots didn't make it.
Yeah.
Only 2 are this size of my row.
We had a bunny in our garden.
A bunny,
bunny.
and dairy carrot tops too. So anyway, I simply, when they grow through May, I thin them right away to about 2 inches apart. And you can have a single row. You can have a bed with 3 or 4 rows, 3 inches apart. But do it right away because carrots are slow growers. They don't like the competition. So by the time 10, 12 weeks have passed, you've got a good sized carrot about 2 inches apart in your row. And the next thing to thin are your onions. Now,
that is a beautiful onion.
I think, I didn't look at the map. We're talking about maps. You see, you can't remember. I grow 3 kinds of onions, and 2, the Walla Walla and the Patterson, in the beginning kind of look alike. They're white onions. Claire needs you. Okay. Rima is doing double duty today. She's helping out at the desk, and then she sits here and helps me out. Okay. A reminder, if you tuned in early on in the spring, to get a big fat 4 or 5 inch onion by September, you really need to start your seeds indoors in late March, so that after 4 to 5 weeks, they are thinner than this pencil, really, and you've given them a couple of haircuts. So the tops are only this high. And you set them out in the row 2 to 4 inches apart. Then come early July through August, you thin every other one so that you're left by, say, middle of August with your spacing of roughly 4 to 6 inches, depending on your quality of soil and the variety. So once again, you can eat small young onions. Now, if you bought the sets, I suggested you don't do that anymore because most of the big companies don't properly store them over the winter at the right temperature. And so you will hardly ever get a big 4 or 5 inch bulb out of them. All righty. And if you sow just seeds in late April, once again, they need to have a big enough root system so when the long days, short nights of June and July come along, that's when something goes off in a little bulb head that says, oh, long days, short nights, time to make big fat bulbs. So anyway, onions. The other day, we trimmed back our wax beans and my green beans that had already produced about 3 weeks worth of beans. And they were petering out, no more blossoms, no more blossoms, no more beans. So they were cut down to rather than pulling them up and replanting, we simply trimmed them back about 2 inches to the ground, getting rid of all the leaves, because sometimes beans have diseases like rust. You want to get rid of all the leaves. And then you've got the root system there, a jump start, and they will grow quickly, like within 5 weeks instead of 7 to get more beans. Now, Rima had a question about her peas.
Oh,
So,
yes.
so
Well,
let's turn this so they can see you too.
hi. So last week, Mary Lou talked about beans and how you could cut them off
Mhm.
and they will grow again. And so I asked her if you could do that with peas, because my peas are almost over. They aren't yet, but they're getting there. So she said, let's experiment. So I have 2 rows of peas. So one row, I'm just going to cut them off. We say about 3 inches.
Yeah, pea
Off the
leaves, peas don't seem to have, as far as my experience of 35 years here in Allegheny County and many more in other places, peas don't seem to have any problems. So unlike the bean leaves, sometimes have a fungus on them that you want to get rid of. So I would maybe cut them back 6 inches
Okay.
and see if they will regrow.
Okay.
We don't know.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm having a little trouble with Japanese beetles.
They
On the
still haven't
peas.
shown up at my place yet.
They're not very many.
Mhm.
There are very few. I do the dawn patrol and I get maybe 3.
Oh, that's
or
not
4.
many.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they are on that. They like the peas for some reason.
Really?
Peas and asparagus. Yeah, that's what they're going after.
Huh. They never bothered well, I'm gonna knock on wood. I wonder where that comes from. They haven't showed up yet on my
Yeah.
hilltop.
Yeah.
All righty. So we're gonna try and experiment and we'll get back to you in a month or so to let you know whether
See
they're
what happens,
growing.
yeah.
And once again, the peas I gave you are ready in 60 days, I think, the green arrow. So that's 2 months. So July, middle of September,
Mm,
but they'll have a jump start because their root system's already there.
Right.
So I'm guessing you're going to get some peas by the first week in September,
That'd be
which
great.
ought to be 3 weeks before the average last frost. And peas, a frost won't kill them. So they're going to keep doing it, and they're higher up. So, and the frost tends to be
Right.
cold lower down on the ground. So I am guessing you're going to get another crop of peas, but we'll find out.
They're still producing too.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about saving seeds some other time because otherwise we're not going to get done.
Okay.
Because I had given her seeds I had saved from the year before. All righty. Part 2 is making a map. Now, why do we need to make a map besides proving our point that we remembered correctly?
Not necessarily.
Okay. You really need a notebook and a map. And since we're going to suggest a 3-year rotation, which is what they suggest, you're going to need 3 maps. You know, it's like keeping your tax records, 3 years, right?
Right.
Unless you're in business, and then it's 7 years.
Seven,
You have to, yeah. Okay, so think of it in terms of that. Now, we're gonna make it very simple for you math allergic people.
Good.
I was thinking today, what's a map? It's a representation to scale. If I want to drive like I used to from here to San Diego, that's almost 3,000 miles. The map would be 3,000 miles long. Like, think of an old-fashioned scroll, right?
Uh-huh.
That you'd unroll as you drove along.
Mhm.
That's no good. So you need to shrink the map down. But in that case, I'm going to round it off. Let's say it's about 1,000 miles to the Mississippi River and almost another 1,000 to Colorado, and then the final 1,000 to get to San Diego. So when I shrink my map down, say to 3 feet instead of 3,000 miles, I want Chicago to be at about a foot and the Colorado at 2 feet and the ocean Pacific out there at the end at 3 feet. It's to scale. So here is a simple scale, even for the math deprived. 1 foot in your garden is going to equal 6 inches. No. Dummy dumb. Even the great mathematician makes mistakes. It's a good thing I didn't set up the Webb telescope. It would be where? Okay, equals a 1/2 inch on your paper. So a foot in the garden is going to shrink down to a 1/2 inch on your paper. My garden is 20 by 30. So on the paper, 20 feet is going to be 10 inches by 15 inches, which of course doesn't fit on your, what is it, 8.5 by 11, or is it 8 by 11.5 paper? So
Right.
whatever, get a bigger piece of
Yeah,
paper.
11 by 17.
Yeah, bigger piece of paper. All righty. Some people just buy graph paper, and that's usually 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch little squares and then inch big squares. So, or you can make your own graph. All you need is a pencil and a ruler, and you make your own lines. All righty. So and this is something you do in the wintertime when you can't go out in the garden and work, but you're in the gardening mood. So you look at your catalogs, you make a list of what you want to get. You look at your past records in that notebook. What didn't work last year? What didn't work for you this year?
Cauliflower.
Cauliflower.
Broccoli's pretty lame.
Broccoli, I don't know what happened to the broccoli. I've never had this happen. It just didn't head. And I did everything the same as I've done
Rice
for
did, but
50
it's
years.
Small.
You as well? I didn't have any.
Yeah. Huh.
So anyway, okay, so
The chard wasn't real happy either. The Swiss chard.
chard,
We usually get a ton of it.
that's a buggy thing. Laura is growing her chard on her balcony in the town this year. And she said, the bugs haven't found it yet. 1 story up in the middle of the town. So anyway. So either make your own graph paper or buy some graph paper. I just make your own graph paper. Or of course, a lot of you will just do it online.
Oh, right.
That's your choice. I still love paper. All righty. Then what's to consider for your map? Well, you want to orient you, say, okay, here's my garden. This is north and this is south, and that'd be east and this is west. So I always label the directions. And then I try and make my paths only a foot wide. But as I've gotten older and more clumsy, I find that it helps if they're a little wider. And then depending on how you want to go about it, I would suggest at least 2 to 3 foot wide beds, rows that you've raised up, because you can reach in easily 1.5 foot. Some people make 4 foot wide beds, because think about it. If you have only a certain size for your garden, you don't want to waste 1/3 of it with your paths.
Yeah.
So the wider the beds and the thinner the paths, without you falling over into your beds, the better for productivity.
Right.
All righty. Then I suddenly thought this morning when I was rewriting this, Colored pencils would be nice. Wouldn't that be fun? You could use a green pencil for peas, a red pencil for the tomatoes, et cetera, et cetera. And at a glance, you could say, oh, the tomatoes are here, the squash is here. Da, 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 da.
You get stickers too. That'd be fun.
Oh, stickers.
I'll bet there are stickers out there.
I bet there are.
Veggie stickers.
Yes. And if you're doing it on the computer, I'm sure there are all sorts of little icons,
yeah.
are they called? Images that you can use. So it's quite fun to do. And, I often say the most fun to some extent and the easiest aspect of gardening is when you sit in the house in the wintertime with a cup of cocoa and do your mapping. There are no bugs to deal with. There's no hail to ruin your tomatoes. There's, everything's perfect, right? Okay. Now, you need this year's map. If you didn't make one when you planted your garden in April and May, go do it now, because you're going to use this year's plan to decide where to plant what next year. And since it's 3 years rotation, if you're just beginning, you should, like your tax records, you should keep 3 years of mapping so that you will remember the third spring. Now, where did we put those tomatoes, honey? And you won't have to argue with honey about where they were. Alrighty. And that notebook, I always find August, late July and August, a good time. If you have a bench in the garden, pick a cool day or put on your big hat and take some lemonade or whatever, and your notebook, and there should be a whole page at least what really worked this year and then why you think that was. Last year we had more than enough rain and not enough sun. That made certain things grow like crazy, but other things like the tomatoes took a long time to ripen. They weren't happy. So you mark these things down. Or I planted the carrots too close and I didn't thin them, and so all I have is skinny little orange carrots or whatever. Or I didn't harvest the radishes on time and they were very woody tasting. Why bother? So that sort of thing. As a reminder for next year, don't do that. Or what really worked well. That new electric fence really kept the critters out or whatever. Alrighty. So success and failures and ideas then for 23, the next year. Rima and I, since we grew the same seeds that I had saved from the year before of green arrow that are only supposed to grow 3 feet high, wound up, they're still growing like Jack's beanstalk. So there I was in late June having to put more trellises and fences up, which is a real nuisance. You should put down whatever is going to support your stuff when you plant the seeds. So next year, I don't know. You know what I ought to do? I ought to buy some new green arrow, plus the ones I've saved, and plant 2 sections and see if it's the saved seeds that are reverting, which they shouldn't do for peas. Okay, got to move on or we'll never get to our main topic. All righty, part 3. Planning for what you're going to do in 23, next year. And I suddenly thought this morning when I was thinking how to organize this, it's like a game of checkers versus chess. Do you play either of those?
I have.
Yeah, I'm not a game player. My brain, for checkers is basically a simple game. Chess supposedly is not a simple game. Who ever heard of an international checkers contest? I'm sure there are some, but I haven't heard of it. But the chess stuff really gets in the news. I remember when the American beat the Russian back, was that 30, 40 years ago? Oh my God, headline news. All righty, so planning your garden, oddly enough, I think is a game of chess. Because like chess, unlike checkers, there are many, many, many things to consider. And after I went through all the things in my mind and wrote them down, I thought, there ought to be an app for this, that you could sit down and you could type in the 10, 12, whatever variables. I grow this, my garden is at such and such a latitude, the slope is such and such, my average frost, da, 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 da. And then just press a button. And out comes your garden plan. Because the computer, like Deep Blue, was that the chess, that beat the chess champion? I think, yeah.
I don't remember.
Eventually, the computer beat whoever he, Spassky or whoever he was, the Russian champion. Oh dear, what are we coming to? We'll be sorry. As Hawkins said, you want to be careful with IT. So anyway,
You mean IA
IA, thank you.
or AI?
AI,
Artificial
whatever it
intelligence.
is, yes,
AI.
yep.
There we go.
Anyway, it's more fun to do it yourself. Keep the brain going. So here are the things you have to consider. Where am I? Top of the page. How much space do you have? And then remember we talked about when you plant things close together to maximize your production, there's what's going on under the ground versus what's going on the top of the ground. So you have to keep that in mind. That's one thing. Second of all, some things really need all day sun. Others can get by with half day sun or dappled. Then you have to think about the companion planting that we talked about. Marigolds mixed in with your kale or your broccoli, something to do with nematodes. My notes here. And keeps the bugs away, maybe because they don't like the smell.
Yeah.
Or perhaps companion planting for broccoli, sweet alyssum, which attracts pollinators. And certain crops in your garden need the bees and the flies and the butterflies. So you attract those pollinators and they do double duty. Also, I like color of a certain type in my garden. And I gave the example of when I grow cosmos, which tend to grow 4 feet tall and blow over on my windy hill. And they have the white, the pink, the lavender, purple, and they blend beautifully with the blue green of the asparagus, which also grows 4 feet high. So I used to plant a couple of cosmos in the asparagus, which was fine because cosmos were tender. So I couldn't put the starts out until late May, but I was still cutting down the asparagus. So the cosmos got to grow a bit before the asparagus in July kind of filled in,
yeah.
but it held the cosmos up, right? So yeah, what else? Okay, babble. Let me look back here. And for me, the visuals are important. So besides the botany and the biology, the colors, and that's why I said that lavender, purple, sweet alyssum under the blue green broccoli, I think it's just a beautiful combination. All right, so then besides all of that, the topic of the day is rotating for health and vigor. And before, so we have to go back and do a little history now. I love to do this. History. If we're going to round things off, if Homo sapiens existed for at least 100,000 years, for 90,000 of those, we were hunter-gatherers. And only the last 10%, 10,000, have we been farmers. So we didn't worry about crop rotation in those days. We went where the blackberries grew. We went where the manioca roots grew, or the nut trees were ready to harvest. And we moved around. But once we started farming, then a couple of things began to happen. Tilling was one of them. And we're beginning to think differently about that now, but for thousands of years, every fall or spring, you would turn the soil over and till it, and often leave it bare over the winter, which of course led to erosion of the wind and the rain, the water. And it takes Mother Nature about 100 years to create 1 inch of topsoil. And I'm sure that flood they had in eastern Kentucky a day or two ago washed many, many inches of topsoil away, meaning hundreds of years if Mother Nature had to replace it all. And for us to replace it, it's usually expensive and we don't usually bother. So we've lost our topsoil. All righty. And then when we started farming, we started settling down into larger towns and eventually cities. We didn't move anymore. So the same area was farmed year after year after year. And just like your grandsons would happily eat macaroni and cheese and nothing else, to the detriment of their health, certain crops use up certain nutrients in the soil. So if you keep growing whatever, corn, in the same spot, decade after decade, after a short while, the soil is going to be depleted, especially of the nitrogen. So that became a problem. And also, we talked about how bugs,
Yeah.
there were many diseases that as hunter-gatherers living in small communities that moved around a lot didn't have. It was only when we crowded into cities that things like typhus and chickenpox and some of those other diseases, and only the cancers as we lived beyond 30 years, 27 years, whatever it was in the old days, didn't live that long. So anyway, problems began to develop. So we began to look for cures. Now, when I was in 5th grade, I think it was history rather than English class, we had a little book that talked about 5 different cultures. And for some reason, I remember the one down in Brazil in the rainforest. And the culture there for thousands of years was the village, maybe 50 people. You would clear 1 to 5 acres of jungle, build your houses, set up your storage, farm it for 3 to 5 years. And then the soil would be totally depleted. And sometime I don't know if we'll have time for this in our short, 13 weeks, whatever it was, different soils in different parts of the world, and how some are great for farming. Think of our breadbasket, the Midwest, and some are useless for farming. Tropical rainforests are useless for farming because the soil does not have any, and they don't keep any nutrients. I'd love to go on about that, but I can't. So every 5 years, let up and move a mile, 2 or 3 down the jungle, clear another 5 acres and do it over again, over and over and over. And maybe after 100 years, 20 cycles, the original site, which had grown back up in jungle, could be used over again. Alrighty, that was one cure. In medieval Europe, and I don't know exactly when they did this, they came across the idea, and maybe the Romans had it. I don't know much about Rome for some reason. Rome has never interested me, so I haven't bothered learning about it, but they might have done this also. But in Europe, you did whatever for 3 years. You divided your land, and some of it was common land, into 3 sections. And every 3rd year, you let it lay fallow. I don't know if they planted what we call green manure crops, or if they simply let the weeds and the grasses and whatever grow up for a year to rest the soil, to replenish the soil. Somewhere along the line in there, once again, you could look it up. I think it was around the 15th century, maybe the 16th. The Europeans, discovered sugar beets, which are not like our little beets. Sugar beets, like old carrots, were huge, maybe a 5-pound, whatever. And they were great for feeding pigs, horses, cattle. And so all of a sudden, unless you were really a poor peasant on the land, a family, an extended family of maybe 12 people, if you count grandparents and a bunch of kids and the unmarried sister and whatnot, could afford to have a cow. Ta-da. And maybe 3 brothers and their extended families could afford a horse. So all of a sudden, plowing became much easier when you had a horse pull the plow. And the cow gave milk, cheese, butter, which made everybody healthier because of the proteins and the calcium. But what do all those animals do besides feed you? They also poop, right? And manure became a good fertilizer and an organic enricher of the soil. So all that helped Um, and I don't know where, once again, you could research it. I should probably research it. I should make Rima research it. Somewhere along the line, somebody figured out legumes, peas, beans, crown vetch, that pink flower that's blooming along the roadside, vetches, all were, and locust trees are all legumes, which means in their roots systems are little nodules that house those nitrogen fixing bacteria. Because growing plants need nitrogen, but not the N2 that's in the air, 80% of the air we're breathing. That's useless. It has to be converted to a nitrite or a nitrate. And those little bacteria do it all for us. So maybe somewhere along the line, in that fallow year, it'd be good to plant clovers, say, or soybeans, or some kind of bean crop, pea crop, just for enriching the soil.
Bird's foot trefoil.
I think any, yes, yeah, I think any kind of trefoil. Yeah, I think so. All righty. So, and then, where am I? How are we doing on time?
Got almost half an hour left.
Oh, good. And then came World War II. And a lot of science, whether it be going to the moon or growing crops, comes out of pure research that was done during the war for primarily wartime purposes. I hate to say this, but well, no. Think of Vietnam and all the herbicides to spray the jungles so the Viet Cong couldn't hide in the jungle under the leaves, because you just wiped all the leaves out with the spray. So you use Roundup. What's Roundup? Another type of Agent Orange of a different name and chemical composition. All right, so out of that came chemical fertilizer. Now, I don't blame people, because human nature is, especially when we evolved over that million years, hundreds of thousands of years, life was tough. And if there was an easy way of doing things, why on earth would you do something hard? Like climb Mount Everest? Why the hell would you do that? That takes so much energy, and you're barely surviving, you know, energy wise as it is. You don't have excess energy to run races or whatever. So you do what's the simplest, and that is built into our unthinking brain, I think. Think about it. If you had to grow food organically the way it was done in the past, that means really understanding a lot of knowledge. You know, you have to learn a lot about how plants grow and what soil is and all. It takes time to learn those things. And then you have to keep a cow so you can have them, or a horse, so you can have the manure. And if anybody's ever done this, the manure doesn't transport itself out to your garden. You have to move it, usually with a wheelbarrow and a shovel in the old days. And all of that, you know, was hard work.
Plus, they have to be fed, the animals.
And the animals have to be
food,
fed. That's true.
Grain and everything.
That's why, here's another divergence, 2 sentences. The people of Siberia and Finland, the Lapps, who learned to semi-domesticate the reindeer, probably in the 1400s, were smarter than the Inuit who used the dogs, because the Inuit had to feed the dogs and the reindeer could feed themselves. Okay, that's an aside. So chemical fertilizer, just think about it, especially, you know, we have little gardens, but if you're a farmer in the Midwest and you have 160 acres, a quarter of a square mile of corn, you just put the fertilizer and the chemical spray and everything, and you just drive the tractor back and forth, and it's done. Now, I was going to leave talking about fertilizers to the end, but maybe I'll mention it here. Do you use any chemical fertilizers in your? You don't. So you consider yourself a pretty pure, almost 100% organic gardener?
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much.
We get manure from the equestrian center.
Right. And some people would even question, what do they feed the horses and what comes through the,
so, yeah, we're not that.
Yeah. Okay. And some people are 100% chemical. Forget all this hard work and nonsense. We're just going to dump the granules or the liquid and spray and whatever. And I'm probably a 90%er, maybe 85% organic gardener.
Yeah.
Partly because I was a chemist once upon a time. So I'm not allergic to chemistry. I think chemistry has done wonders for our modern life. And if you knew anything, you would never want to go back 200 years ago and live in a chemical pure world, because I'd be dead by now, and so would you. As a matter of fact, in America, in 1900, when my dad was born, do you know what the average age of the American was?
40.
Oh, 47.
Oh, wow.
Which is to me shocking when I
Yeah.
first read that years ago. Really? Anyway, I think the main problem with the big farms, especially going basically almost 100% chemical, is that they forgot the soil. Unless you go hydroponic, where it's water and chemicals and you don't care about the soil, which is a totally different kind of farming than we have done for 10,000 years. The soil is not just there to hold up the plant. The soil is a living organism, and part of that life is what contributes to the fertility of the soil and provides you with healthy plants that produce a lot of food for you to eat. So what happened was, it was so easy just to toss out the fertilizer. I don't need to do all this work with the manure. I don't need to grow cover crops. I don't need to do whatever, because look how it boosted it went from, I'm going to make this up, 100 bushels of corn per acre, whatever it is, to 130 for a lot less work. Why wouldn't I do that? And for a few years, it was fine. And then, of course, as the soil died, it wasn't so fine. And then you needed to use more fertilizers, and things just went from bad to worse. Okay, so that's that. Another method for keeping the soil alive and healthy and productive was to grow cover crops, also known as green manure. Now, do you do that in your garden? No. Okay, I don't either, because I always wanted to start my garden really early, as you know, in the spring. And if you plant a cover crop, let's say you dig up your potatoes at the beginning of September, you should plant something like winter rye that will start to grow in September into October, and then sort of die down, but not die. And then it will start growing again in the middle of April, the old days. And then when it got about 4 to 6 inches high, green manure, you turned it under. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, you planted. Well, that just, for a short growing season, threw off my early plantings.
Right, yeah.
So instead, I dug in leaves, and that was my version of building up my soil. But the cover crops, the advantage is that one, they protect the soil in the winter from rain and wind. But two, something we don't think about, when we harvest our crops, say in late August, September, early October, there's still nutrients in the soil. And since we live in a climate where it rains a lot in the fall and the winter, and then there's snow, a lot of those leftover nutrients, especially nitrogen, leach away in the rainwater. If something's growing there, it captures it and keeps it over the winter to turn under in the spring and be released then. So that's something people don't usually think about. All right, finally, rotation. How many minutes have we got left?
15.
Oh, we have plenty of time, more than enough time. This just popped into my head. Just like teenagers, boys, would eat macaroni and cheese all the time, grandma has a different diet, whatever that is. Toast and coffee for breakfast, let's say. Plants come from families, just like we do. And therefore, if you come from the same family, you almost always have the same nutritional needs, and you attract the same bugs and diseases. So the idea of rotating, and right off the bat, I'll say, it's easy for a farmer with 160 acres. He might grow corn and soybeans and hay, and he can rotate those. If the hay has a lot of clover, which is a legume in it, then the corn should follow the hay crop, right? It's easy for him to rotate. But when you're dealing with 1,000 square feet, it's much harder, especially for the bug attractions, because if a Japanese beetle is sitting over on your asparagus and 30 feet away are your green beans, they're going to find the green beans as well as the asparagus. Yep. However, as far as nutrients go, it's a good idea. So, let me just, that I think, yes. Alrighty. So Rima looked up, and you guys can look up and find a chart, which will be more or less the same if you're basically interested in the nutrition and the bugs and the diseases. Let me see what I did here. Okay. As I said, I gave up growing corn a few years ago because it just wasn't worth it. No matter what I did, the raccoons got it. So now I buy my corn. I looked at this chart, and some things I grow and some I don't. But if you have any legumes, such as peas or beans, they suggest you grow them in a block or in a bed. So for me, my beds are 2 to 3 feet wide and about 20 feet long. So I would donate bed 1, let's say, to my green beans, my wax beans, my lima beans, my peas. And here we go with the chess game. I don't always do that because I have other reasons for planting things by things. But ideally, that would be a way to go.
Yeah, you know what I just thought of? We were either discussed this last time or the time before, having the peas and planting, this is what I did, planted lettuce.
Yes.
So that the peas could help
shade
from getting blown over and
shaded in the, if you let your, I've been trimming back my lettuce and it's still sending up edible leaf stalks now.
Ours are too,
but okay.
They desperately want a bolt. But.
Yep. Alrighty, then keep your potatoes together. Once again, potatoes are one of those, lots of people would say, why should I grow potatoes? They're pretty cheap at the store, and New York State grows potatoes. But I just love my varieties. And I remember 2-3 years ago, and Laura, I came back from California and I gave her a little section in my garden, and she had never had real potatoes. She couldn't believe how good these New Orleans were when she harvested the first 1 or 2. Anyway, so, but because potatoes attract a lot of diseases and bugs, I just plant them together, a double row in a 3-foot wide bed. Each row would be about 1.5 feet wide, and I plant the hills a foot apart. So you can keep an eye out for, like, what was it, the Mexican bean beetle, I think, is the one that gets into the potatoes.
Isn't there a potato bug?
And the potato bug and lots, and then there's that, whatever that was, that wiped out the potatoes in Ireland 150 or so years ago and killed 1 million people because they starved to death.
Yeah,
that was wilt.
Some kind of a,
that was a bacterial wilt.
That's what I thought.
Like the tomato. I think potatoes and tomatoes, for some reason, they say you shouldn't plant them together. I forget why, because they're not, I don't believe they're in the same family, are they? What you find, are the tomatoes and the potatoes might be together, nightshade family, right?
Nightshade, potato. Yeah, you're right.
Right.
Both nightshade.
And what else? Eggplants?
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, I get
peppers.
And peppers. Yeah. So all nightshade. By the way, nightshade. There's some wild nightshade that's deadly poison. So, as a matter of fact, when when tomatoes, which come from the New World, were in the 1500s brought back to Spain and then throughout Europe, for 100 or 200 years, remember, they did not eat them. The nightshade family,
Yeah.
poisonous, but they grew them because they were ornamental.
Yeah.
And I don't know who the brave soul was that finally said, hell, I'm eating one. And look, I didn't die. I don't, that'd be an interesting history to find out.
That'd be a great story.
Yep.
Somebody tries to murder somebody else by feeding them these tomatoes,
Yes, and they don't
it
die.
doesn't work.
Oh, that is good.
And they say, oh, it's really good. This is great.
There you go. A mystery set in the 1500s.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we going here? Okay, so potatoes in a double row, all by themselves. And then the Brescia, is that how you say it, family? I grow broccoli. My daughter grows kale and radishes. I used to grow cabbage. I actually used to grow cauliflower, which is the prima donna of the family, hard to grow.
Yes.
This is another aside. If you start your broccoli and your cauliflower early to plant out the third week in April, especially the cauliflower, but also the broccoli, at what they call the 7-leaf stage. I think the leaves come out in pairs. So when 7 of those, if they get chilled, in other words, if the temperature drops to 40, which often it does in April, they will do what is called buttoning. I just made that up. But instead of making a nice big broccoli head or cauliflower head, they just make little ping pong ball size. Yeah. And I don't know, it's a physical chemistry kind of a thing related to putting them out too early and then it getting chilled. And cauliflower is really particular about that. But anyway, and radishes, all those have a similar type of fairly good size seed, and it's all rough looking. So the seeds all look kind of like alike. But I would put them all together as a family also. Because that little white cabbage moth will find them. And then you have the little green worms.
Oh, yeah.
I've
seen those. Yep.
All right. Because of size, I threw my tomatoes and zucchini and summer squash together in a 3-foot row. You can buy, so they say, some summer squash, some zucchini that are supposedly only grow 3 foot in diameter. I've yet to find one that does that.
Ours are huge.
It starts maybe, and then you notice it doesn't stay in a circle.
No.
It starts heading south towards the sun. But anyway, and the tomatoes, depending on how you stake them, and if you keep them just to one stem, you could probably put 2 side by side in a 3-foot wide row, or just let more stems grow and stake, say 3 stakes, tie them up.
Yeah, I have tomatoes growing by my zucchini, and the zucchini is
creeping in.
It's creeping in there towards the tomatoes, which the tomatoes are doing fine, but.
Well, the old Indian, you grow the corn and then the pole beans and then the squash.
Right.
And Chester Galley, who's no longer with us, but was a great master gardener and a wonderful teacher. He was so quiet. Never realized when we were first learning years ago in our classes for master gardeners, and just sat there and didn't say boo. And then, I don't know, weeks later, we were up at his house and he gave a talk on something or other. And all of a sudden, this man just came alive. And he was so interesting. And he had a great garden. And his theory was that the pumpkin and the squashes were prickly. And a lot of them are, although they're trying to breed that out. And that would grow through his corn and keep the raccoons out. And he said it worked. And I thought, nah, that raccoon wants that corn. Some scratchy pumpkin leaves aren't going to keep him out. But you could try that if you're still trying to grow corn. Then I had a row of odds and ends. If you look on the list, there are some things that I grow, one here, one, in 5 different families. So I thought, okay, I'll put them all together. And then I did one of my, how do we utilize the space most economically? And so what I did was my 3-foot wide bed, down the middle of it, for the first 10 feet, my carrots, and then my beets. And because Yeah, you have to do some weeding if you don't mulch it a little bit right away. But they're easy to reach over 1.5 feet and pluck when the time comes. Then on either side of that, and I allowed 6 inches for them. On either side of that, I allowed another 6-inch band, all 20 feet, where I planted my onions, my little baby onion sets. And on the outer edge, 8 inches I left, was a row of lettuce and a row of spinach. And then because the carrots and the beets, you're gonna, by early July, they're gonna be gone. So I thought, why not plant them again, but reverse it? Once again, put the beets where the carrots were and the carrots where the beets were, just in case they want to use up different nutrients. The onions are going to continue to grow until September. And then on the edges, switch where the spinach was, put some lettuce. Where the lettuce was, although July might be too early for spinach, it really doesn't like hot weather. So I don't know, maybe you just want to leave that row fallow but mulched so you don't get a lot of weeds. So that's, when I love to play around with designing things. That's what I thought possibly you could do. But it depends on what you are growing.
Yep.
Now, if you want to do, corn, I don't see why the farmers don't do this. You know how they plow their fields and then they plant their corn, and then they usually, in the old days anyway, they'd go through at least twice, tilling between the 3-foot wide rows. Plant your corn a little closer if your tractor allows that. I'm sure you can adjust things. Sow clover in between. Let the clover grow and do it densely so it crowds out other seeds that would sprout. Because that's going to be producing nitrogen for your greedy corn.
Right.
And it's going to save you on time and gasoline, especially with the price these days, right? So anyway, I think I'm run out of ideas. What time is it?
It's time.
It's time. Good, it's time. So have fun, guys. Remember, we're only halfway there. We've got August, September, at least 2 months probably without frost. And a lot of these things can linger over. Broccoli, peas into October. Carrots in the ground, all those things.
Great. All right.
And right now, off the top of my head, I forget what we're talking about in 2 weeks. So it'll be a surprise. I mean, I know what it is, but I can't remember.
All right. Good.
All right. Okay. Thanks,
Thank
Rima.
you.